All right, welcome back to the last panel of the day, not the last session of the day. Nick and Steve, whom you met in the beginning and during some of the panels as well, will do a very nice and entertaining wrap-up session. But we, in this panel, will talk about technology. And I think if you've basically listened to all of the other sessions today, technology was playing a big role in it, talking about wildfires, talking about vegetation management, talking about wider resiliency strategies. I've always heard that technology is definitely a part of it. And I'm very happy that we have basically both sides here on stage. So the technology side of things, but also the utility side of things. So we will definitely hear some practical insights and approaches on how and when and why to basically implement new technology into your current workflows and systems. With that being said, I would quickly hand it over to the four panelists for a short introduction. Maybe Andrea, you can start, and then hand it over to Martina, Jason, and Rob.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I am Andrea Brown. I am the director of our risk and data analytics team, which sits within wildfire mitigation at PG&E. My team focuses on collecting data about failures, outages, and ignitions on the system. And then we use modeling techniques, both AI, machine learning, as well as physics-based approaches to try and quantify wildfire risk, reliability risk, and other types of risk on the system so that we can come up with strategies of how to mitigate that risk. I've been at PG&E for 5 years, and my background originally is in civil engineering, and I've been practicing data science for almost a decade.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm Martina. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for being here and for having me here. I'm the director for the Americas at Livio. Nick Ferguson introduced Livio at the very beginning, so I don't think I need to spend a lot of words on it, but we provide satellite imagery analytics to help optimize vegetation management programs in the context of a utility mitigate risk. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here with Jason, so I'll hand it over to him. Or Rob, were you supposed to go after me? I forgot.
I think I was next. Yes, Jason Grossman, Vegetation Manager at Liberty Utilities in the Central Region. We have a lot of challenges in our space, and one of the things I enjoy is bringing technology together and converging it to solve those problems and bring results for our customers and shareholders.
I'll pick up for you, Jason. My name's Rob Brook. I've spent about 30 years, I guess, in the industry. I don't recognize the age unless I look in the mirror. I've had a number of stops. I've worked at PG&E. I worked at Esri as one of their industry managers. But through that 30 years, I think I've spent time in almost every role you can have in the industry. Today, I lead an organization called NERA's North American team. And NERA is an engineering and physics-based digital twin that utilities are using to quantify and mitigate risks that they face in their systems. So Patrick, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the introduction here as well. And basically to kick off the panel, maybe all of you can quickly answer what's basically driving the need for new technology, for acceleration on this side of things, maybe from your perspective, from your utility, or of course, Martina, Rob, what you've seen in the wider market. And maybe Martina, you can start, and then I will pass it around because we are having four panelists, and then we keep it in order.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I will probably let the utilities here answer about what are the maybe internal and external forces for changes coming more from a technology standpoint. I think we always need to consider two things: the technological maturity and the adoption curve. So AI-based solutions like Treeline can deliver insights at a scalable, accurate level, and also rapid turnaround that was not possible before. So I think the timing is right, and the timing is key for the technological maturity. where things are no longer experimental. But I think what also is driving a change is that, you know, utilities are realizing that you don't have to be the first mover, but also you better not be the last one, because being the last one or postponing, you know, using a technology that could enhance your business processes and bring impactful value to the business means also bearing higher risk, right? Higher risk of exposure, higher cost. We were at Trees and Utilities a couple of weeks ago, and there was a great panel around insurance and access to insurance, with utilities bearing a high fire risk, and how technology can, for example, provide the data and the insights to show how they can mitigate this risk, and hence also reduce costs and get better access to insurance. So it's all interrelated. So I will let probably the other panelists talk more about the utility side.
Yeah, and I think Jason and Andrea, I've seen you both nodding there as well when Martina mentioned that you don't want to be last, basically. But maybe Jason, you can go first on your motivation or what you can see, why basically the time for new technology is now, or what you're doing there.
Yeah, that need to accelerate the technology adoption is being driven by a convergence of pressures. We've got more extreme climate events. We've got evolving regulatory requirements. Customer expectations have never been higher for reliability on the grid. And vegetation is really a good example of where it's kind of a slow to adapt and change and keep pace with the wildfire risk and the regulatory scrutiny, as well as shrinking budgets. We're all under that same kind of pressure to manage our spend and get the biggest bang for our buck. And that business as usual kind of approach puts utilities at a higher risk for larger scale outages and even higher costs from the emergency response. And then also to kind of piggyback on what Martina said, you can't just jump into this with a reckless demeanor. You have to be smarter and deploy proven solutions, but you still have to kind of be on that leading edge and figure out what's going to fit to what your needs are and adapt that technology to your specific program.
Yeah, and Andrea, anything you want to add there or highlight?
Yeah, I think in terms of need in California, we have a lot of need. We have what we call weather whiplash, where we'll move between some historic rainy and snow seasons to extremely dry seasons. The weather presents really unprecedented challenge ahead of us, and we've had some really catastrophic wildfires that we feel that internally at the company that we need to perform much better, and our main objective at the company is that catastrophic wildfires shall stop, and I think the technology is a key tool in getting there. And I'll also add that we have a very involved regulator who's very involved in keeping track of what we're doing day to day. So the regulatory piece is a huge piece too.
Yeah, and then thank you. Last but not least, Rob, your perspective on this might be similar.
Actually, I don't know that it is. Not to be controversial, that's not my attempt at all, but maybe it's just being old. That might help a little bit here. You know, when we talk about what's accelerating this, I'd like to say, you know, it's not really accelerating. I think there's been a perpetual need for change inside of the industry, and it takes a number of factors together to facilitate that type of change, right? You know, we've had a number of threats, you know, historically as we've gone through, but our ability to address them has changed. And I think what we're sitting at now is a bit of an inflection point where, you know, we have need driven by regulators, driven by climate, you know, but those are things we're always being asked for. I think what's changed is the availability of proven technologies to be able to address some of those pieces. So, you know, we can give answers today or analyze content today in a way that we couldn't do 10 years ago. So, you know, I think it's a combination of all of those. There's need being driven by a bunch of characters, but I think also, you know, the tools and technologies that are available to each one of the organizations to address those challenges are better than they were 10 years ago, and we're finding ways to use them.
Yeah, definitely. And it's always good to be controversial in a panel as well. So feel free to keep on doing that, obviously here. But basically what all of you were saying is that there is more technology available, right? And at least I feel like there is basically another tool coming up every day. Maybe not every day, but there are plenty of options out there. Basically, plenty of things that you can implement. And Jason, I think you've mentioned it already, but maybe you can guide us through a bit on how you usually look at what kind of technology you really want to implement, or how do you figure out what do you really want to look deeper into from the get-go. I think you mentioned to basically start with the problem, right?
Yeah, I definitely, that's where it starts at. You can't just have a tool that you're not going to use. So you have to have a problem to go with it to find the solution. And I think just kind of touching on the satellite imagery, that's one that we found is very useful. I don't know that there's a one hitter quitter out there, the solution to every vegetation management problem. And each individual or each utility is a little bit individual in their approach, but there's a lot of commonality in there too. So taking some of that technology, maybe tweaking it a little bit specifically to fit your needs, or combining multiple different sets of or sources of data to come up with that solution that works for your needs.
Yeah, and I think, Martina, maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that, because I know how we are approaching this usually together with potential customers and partners, obviously. But what is your take there?
And I like what Jason said about starting with the problem, and I would add to that it's important also to identify the problem we're solving, but how this is directly tied to broader objectives and broader KPIs. So from a corporate level, for example, so are you looking at, I don't know, KPIs that improving reliability or affordability or customer satisfaction or whatever that is, and making sure that the technology you're choosing to solve that problem also ties to the bigger picture. I think that that's very important. From our side, we see sometimes R&D and innovation departments being, the first enabler of getting a technology acquainted with the different business units. But it's important that the challenges of the different target personas and the end users are also recognized, right? That you look at across the board and see, what do the field crews care about? What do they need in their daily work and daily operations? What keeps them up at night? Not just the manager, not just the CEO of a company, and kind of try and tie them all together. And then one last thing is try to look for a proof of value, like not necessarily like a concept, like is this working or not working, but has this been operationalized somewhere else? And can we replicate this in our company? That's what we see working well.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. And I will ask the same question to you, Rob. A similar opinion or controversial opinion this time?
No, actually, I would agree with Jason and Martina. Our world is full of shiny toys. I have two teenagers who inundate my life with need for shiny toys, right? I think in the utility side, it's really understanding the problem, right? I mean, identifying it, but understanding the context around it, like what is changeable, what is movable, what actually provides value to us. And the other thing that I would add is, well, we often don't think about it, right? I think I would guess that Andrea and Jason, most of your day is filled holistically with the problems associated with the organizations you work inside of. Sometimes we forget we're actually part of a much larger community, right? And we're all facing similar challenges, different context, potentially different feeling in some places, but the challenges can be similar. And taking the time to watch what your neighbors and your peers are doing, in some cases they've had a chance to approach something earlier. Maybe they had a slightly different context and could tackle an issue before you could. But what's worked for them, right? And what hasn't worked? And really trying to take those learnings from other places to streamline what you're able to do inside of your own organization and keep a focus on success and the KPIs.
Yeah, nice. And I think, well, talking a bit about sharing learnings here as well, maybe, Andrea, you can guide us through one project or a specific technology that is already providing a lot of value to you. I think, Jason, you've mentioned satellite imagery there, but Andrea, maybe from your perspective, and from your department, obviously. Maybe you can get us through one project, one certain specific technology.
Yeah, I'll also just chime in to address the previous question that I think having specific metrics is important, and starting from there is key. So for us, for example, when we think of wildfires, we're monitoring ignitions that happen during extreme conditions, during windy conditions, during dry conditions. And so taking a look at the data and seeing trends of what's emerging from the data, and then identifying, here are our layers of protection on our system currently. Where are the gaps between the data that we're seeing coming out and the current layers of protection on the system against those ignitions or outages, or whatever we're concerned about? So for us, for example, one gap that we saw last wildfire season, last summer, 2024, was that we had, during extreme heat conditions, we had connectors on the system failing. And those have a higher ignition rate than other types of equipment on the system. And so coming out of that wildfire season, we were looking for technology solutions because we don't currently know where all of those are on our system. So how can we use technology to find those connectors that we're concerned about? And so we looked to image classification, modeling, in AI methodology to take our aerial imagery of the system and automatically identify where those specific connectors are in our high fire areas. So that is one specific use case that we've sort of been tracking over the past 8 months or so. That's been pretty successful.
Nice. And same question to Jason. Maybe you can guide us through one specific project as well, because I think you can actually learn the most out of practical examples, right?
Yes. So I think it was 2019. We started to see infiltration of emerald ash borer on our system. Just a quick background on that. It's a little bug from China that got hitchhiked over on shipping pallet. They think got released in Michigan, and it's slowly been dispersing across the United States. It kills ash trees within about 5 years. So we had our first detection on our system. We had a very good inventory on our distribution on species, so we knew where ash tree was. But our transmission system, which was primarily machine, draft mower, herbicide, not very good species identification. We were able to take some satellite imagery, use some change detection on tree health, identify pockets of trees that were in decline. And we also looked at that on a species basis with using some historical data that we had on distribution to mimic that on the transmission and identify pockets of ash tree where we had potential issues, and then also where they were declining in health. And it didn't just pick up the ash trees, it picked up every species that was declining. We had oaks that were also in decline, and that narrowed down a lot of our scout work that we needed to go do to find those trees and then also remediate them. So again, bringing together a combination of those practices was able to save us some time and money on remediation.
Yeah, nice example as well, and definitely highlighting what all of you were saying before. I would love to dig a bit deeper into basically how to choose the right technology. We've touched that, but then also how to implement it and make it work, right? And you were mentioning it in your examples. You were also mentioning that you basically brought in third-party technology, right? But if I'm working in a utility, and if I look at a specific problem, should I, or how do I decide basically if I, well, actually buy something, build something, or partner up when it comes to these kind of solutions? Is there any rule? Is there any specific process or evaluation method that you would use? And maybe Andrea, you could start there.
Can you rephrase the question or start with someone else? Sorry.
No, it's completely fine. So basically, when it comes to getting the technology in, right? There is always a question like, do you buy the technology externally? Do you try to build it yourself? Do you try to do some sort of partnership there as well? But also, Rob, if you want to answer it from the technology perspective first, and then maybe Andrea has some more context there.
Sure. It's an interesting question, and it's not the first time I think I've been asked. And I'll give you my personal opinion, right? I think, the best case scenario is organizations focusing on what they're actually tasked to do, what their mandate is to do, right? And I've been involved in a number of projects where, we've built a tool inside of a utility. Often that's a challenge, right? Because external organizations have the muscle memory and the processes to be able to continue to maintain it, to support it, all those sorts of things that don't often exist inside of a utility itself. So in most of those cases, you got a small piece of value out of it, but you ended up with a lot of pain around the outside of it trying to keep it and maintain it. So I always feel that, the best place for an organization to go when they're looking for a piece of technology is into that vendor marketplace to find out whether or not there's something that's there. And in a lot of cases, particularly in the startup community, investors are funding organizations' ability to build something very specific that utilities are looking for. And if something doesn't exist inside of there and you can't buy it, I'd say, the next strategy is to try and partner with an organization to have them build something that you want. It removes that long-term ownership and maintenance for it. It gives you someone you can push at to be able to do that. And again, it leverages kind of the best sort of scenario for both of those organizations. I think the most painful one is when the utility builds it themselves. Being external, there's never a shortage of desires associated with the tool or changes or these kinds of things that come in there, and there's not really a process to be able to do that inside of the utility. So at least from my perspective, I think the first option is to survey and buy. The second one is try and partner, and if there's no alternative, then maybe build. But that's just my feeling.
I will respond with, I think I usually go in the other direction where do I have the technology or the skill set to build this internally? If not, is there maybe a vendor that I can partner with to think about how to develop this technology, or how can I put out feelers? I think PG&E is particularly a large company, and we have a lot of resources at our disposal compared to a smaller utility. So I think we have a little bit of a benefit to think about how we can build things internally or partner with other companies to focus on what our particular business needs are to build something that's really valuable for us.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And then maybe Jason, coming from a slightly smaller utility, what's your approach or thought there?
Yeah, I think ultimately we deliver electrons through a wire to people's houses, and that's our primary function. When you look at what it takes to, or some of these larger scale products, it's definitely better to partner with an external source. There's just more resources available, more technology out there. A utility company is not going to launch a satellite and go to space just to capture satellite imagery on their small part of the world and that little system. And to me, I think it starts with relationships with your vendors. Most of the people that I work with currently, I've been working with for at least the last 10 years or a very long amount of time. And it's not necessarily the company, but it's the people as well. And so having those people that are in there that are innovative, creative thinkers with the ability to say, yes, we can, instead of no, we can't. That's kind of what I look for in a partner and going into something like this. I think it also depends kind of on that level of what you're trying to accomplish. Some of this stuff you can do internally. But when you look at system-wide implementation of technology or something to that nature, a lot of times it's easier to partner and go external. Usually that wheel has already been built out there and it can be tweaked, width, diameter, however big you need that wheel to be able to come and operate on your system. So rather than recreate that wheel, sometimes it's better just to borrow it from somebody else and modify it for your needs.
Yeah, an interesting perspective as well. And to sum it up, Martina, what's your take there?
I think I agree with little pieces that have been said by everyone. Like, to Rob's point, right? There are venture capital companies that invest a lot of money into, smart, bright people to build great technology. So there are like millions of dollars being invested into something that fits or could fit into a utility process. I think I would try and focus on how this fits into our context, because you definitely don't want to buy something that creates more silos within the organization. So from our perspective, we always try and understand, how are your current processes look like, what are the systems you already use, and how this technology plugs into the system. So coming from that angle a little bit. And then secondly, to what Jason said, the team you work with, like, even if you buy, it doesn't mean that you can't partner. Like, you can still create a feedback loop, you can still create a trusted relationship, that if the company or the technology partner, the vendor you're working with, is agile enough to take your input and think that this could be useful to you, could be useful to maybe serve their other clients and customize or improve the product based on the feedback, I think that's when you kind of grow together, right? Maybe it's not perfect at the beginning, but you can make it better and more suitable for your use case.
Yeah, thanks everyone for answering. And then we are moving a bit from the choosing part to the actual implementation part. So oftentimes it is obviously required to kind of make an economic and technical case in-house as well to implement new technology. Andrea, maybe you can guide us through your internal process there, and maybe you have some tips for the audience here, right? Who are trying to make a case. What have you seen working well there when you do it internally, basically?
Yeah, so I manage a couple of data science teams, and so when we think about new technology, usually that's to bring in a new set of data, probably unstructured data. So we look to data partners to probably make a purchase for data, and then we think about, do I have the skill set on my team to work with this data, process it, and incorporate it into our existing models that we have? So some tips for doing that is, like, what about data integration? I think that's important to think about. How do our cloud systems work to bring in massive? Usually the data is for most of a good portion of California. It's really large unstructured data. So how do we successfully set up the integration, make sure someone on my team understands the data, that I can evaluate or validate the data to make sure that it's trustworthy, and understand any limitations or assumptions behind the data as we bring it into our risk modeling infrastructure. And then when we rerun our models on that data, that it's well documented and versioned and things like that. That's important for risk quantification. And then I think there's another question about innovative hardware and integrating that on the grid. And I'll let maybe one of my other panelists speak to hardware, or I'm happy to chime in on that if I need to.
Who could talk about hardware here?
Jason, maybe.
Oh, okay. I probably taking kind of what Andrea said and maybe a little bit of what Martina said. Culture. I think culture plays a big part in this too. And technology is only going to work if the people and the processes around it are aligned. And that's kind of some of the snags that we've hit in moving forward. If you're looking to succeed in that innovation, it's the ones that invest in the culture just as much as the training that are going to have that success. And that speaks to software or hardware. I think either one, the boots on the ground engagement and showing how these tools actually work to the crews that are using them, making them safer, faster, and more rewarding, is what helps integrate that adoption. When we rolled out a paperless system 8 years ago, we had a lot of resistance from it. And our field crews, they're hands-on people. They work with their hands for a reason, because they don't want to have to deal with the technology and the integration part of it. But putting the tablets in their hand, after a little while, we had a full day of training, and after about a month's worth of working it, I had one of them tell me if he ever complains about technology again and has to go back to paper maps, he's going to punch me. So that culture and that training, getting the buy-in, making sure that those people have the knowledge to run the hardware and the software, the tablets and the software that you're using to manage it, and promoting that culture of constant learning and adaptation is really what makes a big difference for us.
Yeah, and Martina, maybe you can talk a bit about the getting the internal buy-in there as well, right? Because I think that's something that we see often that is very, very important, obviously.
Yeah, and I'd be keen also to hear Rob's view, coming from a technology standpoint. But when it comes to finding an economic justification, right? You want a new, cool piece of software, or something that can have a real impact. How do you justify that? Usually how we approach it is, which was mentioned in previous panels too. I think Annabelle Rosa at Seattle City Light hinted at something like that, which is understand the metrics. So understand where you are today, what is the negative consequence of where you are today, visualize the ideal future state, and what are the positive business outcomes, and then quantify those, like try and find metrics around those. Try to find the broader initiatives that this new technology is tied into, and then understand the value drivers. Is it going to help you save money, right? Is it going to help you move faster? Is it going to help you decrease risk or increase safety? And then once you have identified this, I think there are two pieces that sometimes we forget to look into, but ask ourselves, has this been done before? So I imagine that from a utility standpoint, right, especially when you acquire a new piece of software, there are different teams involved. There is also procurement. There is, teams on the financial side that can help find a way or can help advise on how such purchase can go through and what are the different models, or also look at how has it been done somewhere else and use the metrics of another similar utility with similar use case and try and translate them into yours. So that those are a few of the ideas I think that come to mind. But Rob, keen to hear maybe from your side, what do you see working?
Well, and maybe this also helps us transition a bit, Patrick, to what have we seen work well in those implementations? Because I think it's kind of a combination of both. And maybe, what I'm saying is similar to what Andrea, Jason, and Martina have all said before this. I think a lot of it really comes down to the business case. Inside of a utility, at least to me, everything's academic that's valuable until you have to build a business case and present it. Right? And the business case is where you dig into the specifics around things, you dig into the requirements, you dig into the KPIs. Probably the best implementations I've seen are ones where we spent weeks working with teams to build out a business case, to be able to determine what the return was, where the KPIs you're going to be able to work through. And I think it's a pretty granular activity, and it's part of that old adage that you spend an extra couple minutes in planning, and it really works out well when you go into an implementation. This helps you understand where, how, and what you're going to impact inside of the organization. And you can't hold people accountable, and you can't measure success if you don't know what it is you're working against, right? So, I think if you want something to be successful, that's generally the place you start. And, we always seem to look for a magic bullet that makes things work well, as opposed to what I think we all understand, which if you go back to the fundamentals of how we do work, that generally is how projects are successful, right? Understanding what the scope of work is, workshopping it properly, making sure you've got a team that's engaged, that's working well, that you have ownership over items, that you're maintaining accountability, that you have a proper change management plan defined for the implementation of work, because I think that's underappreciated and is greatly undervalued. Making sure that your change management plan isn't just, I'm going to do training and do a bit of communication and now you guys pick it up and use it. Understanding how you engage your social leaders. How do you get teams to take ownership over an item? How do you make it their objective, not yours? I think it are all parts of how you make these implementations successful. So, the technology to me is kind of a moot point, because what we're doing is not implementing technology, we're solving a problem, right? And how do you best solve that problem, I think, is what makes those efforts successful.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty good. And also you are answering one or two of my next questions already about the implementation here. So that's appreciated. As we have only around 5 or 6 minutes left and a few questions from the audience, I would have one last, a bit more open question. Whoever wants to answer first can answer first. And I think we've heard it in one or two panels before. But if you look at how basically technology is accelerating, but also utilities are implementing the technology, how would you describe, or what does the utility of, let's say, 2040 would look like if this path is basically continuing?
I mean, I can go first if you want to. My first response to that question is who knows, right? Because I think there's a lot of things that have happened over the last 10 or 15 years that have driven the industry in a direction or another direction that we may not have actually predicted 15 or 20 years ago, right? The role of wildfire is so much more significant than I think any of us really thought it was going to be 20 years ago. And so that's my first thought. But the second thing is, to take a look at what some of the industry leaders are actually doing right now. And there's a particular project that I think is setting the stage for what some of the expectations will be in the future. There's a good handful of tier 1 utilities in the US that have started what they're viewing as an enterprise digital twin project. And the beauty about the term digital twin is that there's so many different digital twins to choose from. It means something different to every person who's there. But if we throw that term out, we think about what they're trying to accomplish, right? These projects are meant to be data-driven decision-making tools for executives. And what they're bringing together is energy flow inside of that utility, the risks that the utility faces, vegetation, wildfire, and a engineering and physics-based view of the assets that they have in front of them, right? And they're running those models and simulations to understand how their system performs holistically, and then use that information for strategic decision-making about what the organization does, right? Where is the best place to spend a dollar? Did I get the highest return? I get the most risk buy down, right? Those are the questions that they really want to ask. And I think a good utility 15 years from now is going to have the tools in their hands that lets them answer the questions that are critical to their operations based on the information that they have inside of it and how they're operating.
Yeah, I think I'll just build off of that to say I'm excited about the future and the technology that's starting to come out. I think that the data, the amount of data you can have on your system and process and use it to monitor what's going on in real time will be important. Rolling out sensors, I think, will become more important, so you're more able to have even more data on how the system's performing. And I expect sort of the maintenance on the system to maybe be more real time as we improve our ability to monitor in more real time. And I think it'll be exciting both from like a visual monitoring as well as monitoring like the sensors and the ability to detect arcing and things like that on the system, not even like 30 years from now, but over the next decade, I think is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's a great outlook, and I think also a great message for everyone, right? We can definitely be excited of what is ahead in terms of technology. So thanks everyone for answering my questions already. We have 2 questions coming from the audience. One is very specific. I think, Jason, you have definitely at least one person that is closely following you on LinkedIn, but I also like the question because it's very practical, right? So you're posting about AI and vegetation work. How are you actually using AI in your, let's say, daily veg practices?
Carry over from the last question, resilience and intelligence, and having that data to be able to use this. Just gave a presentation on this 3 hours ago for another group of co-op guys. There's lots of potential in this. If you have the data to plug into it, it's great. And a couple of the highlights from that presentation, we're taking our costs on an individual tree level, creating a heat map, and it's a simple prompt in there, an Excel file, shoot this out. We can identify areas where we're spending a lot of money that we may need to go back and put more TGR in the ground, get better clearances, focus on removals. That's one of the ways that we can use AI. And again, it goes back to having the data. Another tool we've used is just validation of our tree growth regulator program, TGR. We've had our tree crews measuring regrowth rates on brush or trees that they've cut for the last 5 or 6 years, and plugging that in and finding out the trees that have been treated with TGR and the ones that haven't, and measuring that regrowth estimate, providing statistical analysis. Again, this is just a simple plug and play. We export the data into an Excel spreadsheet, put it into the AI software or program, type in the prompt, and it spits out a statistical analysis that would take us a very long time to compile. And I don't even know that I'm smart enough to do it, but it spits out P values, T values, and all the kind of stuff that shows that our TGR program is working. I think on a secondary level, when you look at some of the office work and paper stuff, we can use AI to go through and find errors on invoices, accounting issues, and also take that information that comes from multiple different vendors in multiple different formats, put that into a secure location, spit it out into a nice, neat formatted deal, and put that into an Excel spreadsheet as well for better tracking that we can use in the Power BI and all kinds of other stuff. There's multiple different little details out there, little things that just are streamlining processes and taking 30 minutes out of your day and turning them into a 30-second task. So one that I'm excited about trying, I just read this morning, it's creating little apps, and you can go in, what do they call it? Well, I forget the term for now, but you go into AI, create a little app, and then it automates a process. What I'm thinking we can do is write that app that runs a report and sends it to an email to us every Monday morning, and validate a lot of our crews and stuff. So a lot of potential out there. I'm sure we're just barely scratching the surface. There is a lot of innovation happening out there. So what I would challenge the person who asked this question is go to my LinkedIn and reply on the comment and say, hey, this is what I'm using it for. This is what I'd like to try. And if we can get that communication going, I think those efforts really snowball from there. And there's crowdsourcing that information. We're all going to be better and stronger because of it.
Nice. So whoever had that question, definitely do it. Looking at the time, I would say we can basically wrap it up, but make sure to follow Jason on LinkedIn and check out the other ones as well. You can also check out my LinkedIn, but I'm basically just talking about marketing stuff, so that might not be too interesting for the audience here. But thanks everyone for joining the panel. I think it was a really interesting discussion here. And then we have one final session to go, because Nick and Steve were listening to all of the sessions today, and they were creating a presentation with the most valuable insights while everyone was speaking. So this is definitely an amazing and interesting last session. But again, thanks Andrea, Martina, Rob, and Jason for joining and for participating. And with that being said, I would end this session, quickly start the last session, and then call it a day. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you again,
Thank you.
and see you in the next session.